The cry that changed everything. Rain poured like a curtain over the city, turning the streets into shimmering rivers of headlights and neon. It was the kind of storm that made people stay in, wrap themselves in blankets, and ignore the world. But not Julian Wexley. Not tonight. Julian stood alone under the glass awning of the Trident Towers, the luxury high-rise he owned. The tallest in the district, drenched in the cold, bitter downpour. He didn't care. The storm outside couldn't compare to the one within. He had just walked away from a multi-million-dollar dinner gone sour, investors pulling out, plans falling through, competitors circling like vultures. But it wasn't that which burned his nerves raw. It was the emptiness. He had everything. Yet somehow he felt like he had nothing. Wiping his face with a silk handkerchief, Julian turned toward the lobby. The bellhop opened the door, and the warmth of the interior wrapped around him, a poor imitation of comfort. "Evening, Mr. Wexley," the doorman greeted with practiced cheer. Julian nodded, barely registering the voice. His mind was elsewhere. As always, the elevator chimed and whisked him up to the penthouse. The entire 78th floor was his. Sleek, cold, and silent. The space looked like something out of a design magazine. Marble floors, wall-length aquariums, and smart glass walls, offering a panorama of the city skyline. But no one waited for him. No laughter. No noise. No life. He tossed his keys into the dish by the door and poured himself a drink. The scotch burned pleasantly down his throat. Another storm rumbled outside. Julian moved to the window, staring at the city below. The alley behind the tower yawned like a black scar between concrete towers, just a service path, overlooked and ignored. The thunder cracked. Then came a sound that didn't belong. He stilled. There it was again, soft, fragile. A cry. At first, Julian thought it was the wind, or a trick of his weary mind. But then it came again. The thin, piercing wail, drowned partially by rain, but unmistakable. A baby. Julian froze, glass halfway to his lips. He turned to look again at the alley, squinting. In the flash of lightning, he saw nothing but dumpsters and shadows. But something inside him, a thread, long buried, pulled taut. He moved. Down the stairs, past security. No time for questions. His polished leather shoes splashed into puddles as he crossed the back lot and turned into the alley. The crying grew louder, desperate, terrified. Then, suddenly, silence. "No," Julian muttered, picking up his pace. "No, no, no." Behind the last dumpster, he saw it. A large black garbage bag, torn at the top, and moving. He dropped to his knees, heart slamming into his ribs. He hesitated only a second before tearing it open with trembling hands. And there they were. Two babies, tiny, shivering, their faces red from crying, eyes squeezed shut. Wrapped in a damp, floral bedsheet, their skin had taken on a frightening shade of pale blue. Rain had soaked through everything. Julian's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't think. Then one of the babies let out a weak, rattling cough, and something inside him snapped into place. He scooped both of them up, holding them against his chest. They were light, far too light, bones and skin, and nothing more. He stripped off his designer coat and wrapped it around them, then bolted back into the building. Inside the Trident Towers lobby, the night security guard jumped to his feet. "Mr. Wexley." "What?" "Arthos. Call an ambulance." "Now," Julian barked. The guard fumbled for his radio, voice shaky. Julian sank onto a bench, clutching the babies tight. His shirt clung to his skin, his heart racing. He looked down at the two tiny faces pressed into his chest. One had a faint red birthmark on her temple. The other had darker skin, and her tiny fist was curled tightly around a string from the bedsheet. Neither made a sound. "Stay with me," he whispered, gently rocking them. The hospital room buzzed with controlled chaos. Nurses moved fast, wrapping the twins in thermal blankets, checking vitals, inserting IVs with expert precision. Julian stood soaked and silent, watching behind the glass. His throat felt tight. A doctor approached. "Mr. Wexley." He turned, his eyes clouded. "How are they?" "They're stable for now. Severe hypothermia. Malnutrition." They were minutes away from cardiac arrest. Julian flinched. "But they'll live." The doctor nodded, though his expression was somber. "We're doing everything we can. They're fighters. You found them just in time." Julian exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. His watch, a custom gold Rolex, still ticked beneath the cuff of his wet sleeve. "Did anyone leave a note? A name?" he asked. The doctor shook his head. "Nothing. We'll contact Child Protective Services, but they'll likely be placed in foster care." Julian looked through the glass again. Foster care. He remembered the beds lined up in a cold room, the smell of bleach and loneliness. He remembered being told he'd been left because he was too much trouble, that no one wanted him, and he knew he couldn't let it happen to them. By morning, the press had caught wind of it. Millionaire TC CEO rescuees abandoned bais from trash. Headlines flooded social media. His PR team advised him to lay low, let the story blow over, but Julian ignored them. He was at the hospital, every hour, every day. He watched as the twins slowly gained strength. He even named them, Alina and Mira. He didn't know why those names came to him. They just felt right. And then came the question that would alter the course of everything. "Mr. Wexley," the caseworker said, adjusting her glasses, "you're not a relative. You're not even registered as a foster guardian. Are you really serious about this?" Julian looked through the glass. Mira had just yawned, her face crunching up like a sleepy kitten. Alina was stretching her fingers toward the mobile overhead. He nodded. "Yes, I want to be their legal guardian. Permanently." The caseworker blinked. "You want to adopt them?" "I do." She stared at him, disbelief all over her face. "Why?" "You're a single man, a billionaire. This will change your life." Julian's voice was low. "That's exactly what I want." 2 months later, Alina and Mira came home. Julian had turned his guest wing into a nursery, hired the best pediatricians, therapists, and a warm-hearted nanny named Lourdes who cried the first time she held them. Still, he insisted on being part of every feeding, every bath, every midnight cry. His work meetings were moved. His life was rearranged. At night, when the twins were asleep, he'd sit by their cribs and watch them breathe. And for the first time in his life, something inside him felt whole. Years passed like falling leaves. Alina grew curious and clever. Mira was brave and artistic. They were different, yet inseparable. They thrived under Julian's love. He never spoke about the night he found them, never wanted them to feel like a burden or a mystery. To him, they weren't abandoned babies. They were his daughters. He became a father not by blood, but by choice, and nothing made him prouder. But time doesn't forget, and secrets don't stay buried forever. 20 years later, Julian stood in his private study, looking at a photograph on his desk. Alina and Mira, smiling in their graduation gowns, arms looped around him. His heart swelled. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Hello." Silence. Then, a woman's voice. "You don't know me, Mr. Wexley, but I know who you are. And I know where those girls came from." Julian's breath caught. Who is this? They weren't supposed to live, the voice whispered. But they did. And now, someone is coming for them. Click. The line went dead, and Julian's world tilted. The voice from the shadows. Julian Wexley stood frozen in the middle of his study, the phone still in his hand, its screen dark. Outside, the sun had dipped beneath the city skyline, casting the glass walls of the penthouse into gold and blood-orange hues. But all Julian could see was the reflection of his own face, confused, pale, and slightly trembling. The woman's voice echoed in his head like a whisper from the grave. They weren't supposed to live, and now someone is coming for them. He slowly placed the phone down, fingers stiff. For a man who had conquered markets, dismantled corporate empires, and stared down billion-dollar investors without blinking, Julian felt strangely powerless. He reached for the photograph on his desk, the one from last spring. Alina and Mira, in matching university robes, stood beside him, eyes bright with promise. They had just graduated from Columbia. Alina in biomedical engineering, Mira in digital arts. That day, Julian had cried for the first time in years. Quiet tears, ones he hoped they hadn't seen. He looked at the photo now as if it could give him answers. But it didn't. It only raised more questions. That night, sleep evaded him. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every creak in the silence a possible threat. He checked the security feeds for the building 3 times. He called his private investigator, Ramsey, and left a voice message. Urgent. Someone called me. I need to know everything about the twins' past. Start from that night. No limits. By morning, the illusion of peace was shattered. The girls arrived for Sunday brunch, like always. Julian had invited them to his place every weekend since they moved into their shared apartment. He used to cook for them, badly, until Mira joked they might die of food poisoning. So now they ordered from a family-owned cafe nearby. Dad. Alina called as she walked in, her long dark ponytail dripping with spring rain. We brought banana nut muffins. Don't pretend you hate them. Mira followed, pulling off her jacket. Hey, did you see the article on biotech's neural prototype? They're totally stealing my senior project concept. I'm suing them one day. Julian tried to smile, but his chest ached with the weight of the phone call. He watched them move through the living room, familiar and full of life. He loved them more than he had ever loved anything. They weren't little girls anymore. They were women. Smart, fierce, kind. But now, there was danger in the air. Something, or someone, was coming. Over brunch, he tried to mask his unease, but Alina noticed. You okay, Dad? You've been staring at your coffee like it insulted you. Julian hesitated. I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well. Want us to bring you some melatonin next time? Mira teased. Or a teddy bear. They laughed and Julian smiled, but inside, his mind was racing. Later, after they left with promises to see him Tuesday, Julian returned to his study. His investigator had messaged. From Ramsey. Meeting in person would be better. You'll want to sit down for this. By evening, Julian met Ramsey at a private office inside a nondescript high-rise across town. The man was a former intelligence analyst, sharp-eyed and efficient. I pulled everything, Ramsey said, sliding a thick file across the table, including sealed records, suppressed police reports, and CPS case notes that were scrubbed. Somebody didn't want those girls found. Julian opened the file. Photos. Police notes. A grainy surveillance still of a woman outside the Trident Towers alley wearing a gray hoodie. Time-stamped 11:42 p.m., just minutes before he found the twins. She dropped them there, Ramsey said. But here's where it gets interesting. We ran facial recognition on her using enhanced reconstruction, cross-checked with missing persons databases. Her name was Dr. Evelina Knox, biogeneticist. Brilliant. Controversial. Julian's head lifted. You're telling me a scientist abandoned those babies? She vanished 3 days after that footage. Her lab was shut down by federal agents. Files destroyed. All staff interrogated. Some disappeared. No records of what she was working on. The official story. Suicide. But her body was never found. Julian's fingers curled around the folder. What was she working on? Ramsey slid a second envelope toward him. a private grant under a shell foundation called Novogen Ascension. Their mission: human enhancement via genetic splicing. Julian stared at him. Are you saying Alina and Mira? We don't know yet, but here's the part that chilled me. Ramsey flipped the page. A scanned fragment of a torn notebook. Half-burned, recovered during the raid. Scrawled in jagged ink were the words: Sequence 12B survived. Accelerated traits confirmed. Emotional resilience, intact. Cognitive aptitude, off charts. But I had to hide them. They wanted the twins, not to study, but to weaponize. Julian's mouth went dry. Back at the penthouse, Julian paced like a caged animal. He had protected them from the world. But now the world, or something darker, was clawing its way back. He pulled out his old flip phone, the one he hadn't touched in 10 years, and called a number etched into the back. A man answered with a single word: Wexley. I need a favor, Julian said. Off books. Deep net surveillance. I want to know if anyone has tracked the names Alina or Mira Wexley in the last 6 months. The voice responded with a low whistle. Someone rattled your cage. Just find out, Julian said. And if anyone's looking for them, I want to know before they knock on the door. 2 days later, the call came. They'd been marked, the voice said. Encrypted chatter flagged on deep forums. Assets 12B located. Timestamps line up with their graduation. Someone was watching. And someone's coming. Fast. Julian clenched the phone. Who are they? Old ghosts. Novogen didn't die. It went private. Went rogue. They call themselves the Ascension Group now. And they don't lose assets. Julian hung up and immediately called the girls. Come home. Tonight. Bring nothing. Tell no one. Alina and Mira arrived confused and concerned, but didn't argue. Julian stood before them, heart pounding. The truth was a stone lodged in his throat. Dad, what's going on? Mira asked. Why do you look like you haven't slept in days? Julian slowly sat them down and told them everything. About the night he found them. About the woman in the alley. About the whisper on the phone that said they weren't supposed to survive. About the secret project. About Novogen. And finally, about the possibility that their very DNA was altered by a scientist who disappeared without a trace. The room was silent. Alina stared blankly at the floor. Mira's fingers twitched as if drawing invisible shapes. You think we're... What? Alina finally said. Experiments. No, Julian said firmly. You're my daughters, no matter what. But everything we know, Mira whispered. Julian moved to them, kneeling so he could look them in the eyes. You were left in that alley to die, but I found you. I raised you. I chose you. And now someone wants to take you back. Alina's voice was calm, too calm. We need to find out who. Julian's brows furrowed. What are you saying? We need answers, she said. About her, about us, and about why they want us now. Mira nodded, her jaw tightening. We're not hiding. We're fighting. Julian felt a rush of both fear and awe. His girls weren't scared. They were ready. But the shadows were already moving. 3 black cars rolled through the back alley that night. Headlights off, windows tinted. Men in gray suits stepped out. No badges, no hesitation. And on a nearby rooftop, a woman in a dark coat watched with binoculars. She whispered into her earpiece. Targets confirmed inside. Initiating Phase 1. Julian's penthouse, once a fortress of silence and solitude, now pulsed with tension. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Outside, the storm clouds had returned, this time quietly swirling above like the calm before the true lightning. Alina stood near the window, her arms crossed tightly, staring down at the street below. They're already here, aren't they? She whispered. Julian looked up from the encrypted laptop Ramsey had given him. He hesitated, then nodded. "I saw 3 unmarked vehicles drive past the alley 5 times today," he said. "Same route, same timing. Nothing random about it." Mira sat curled on the couch, knees hugged to her chest, lips pressed tight. Her usual vibrant presence, her constant spark, was dimmed. "I thought I was just anxious," she said softly. "For years, like something was watching me. Something waiting. I told myself I was being paranoid." Alina turned, her eyes burning. "You weren't." Julian walked over and sat beside them. "You're not alone in this. Whatever these people want, they'll have to get through me first." Mira leaned her head on his shoulder. "You really love us that much, huh?" Julian smiled, brushing her hair back gently. "You saved me the day I found you. I thought I was the one rescuing you, but really, it was the other way around." There was a beat of silence, warm and tender. Then Julian stood. "We can't wait for them to make the first move." That night, Julian activated a private command center beneath the building, a remnant from his old security contracts with global governments. What had once been a hardened server room now served as a digital bunker. Reinforced steel walls, satellite uplinks, identity cloaking software, off-grid communications. Ramsey arrived just after midnight, carrying 2 hard drives and a nervous energy that didn't suit him. "I decrypted part of Novigen's data," he said, placing the drives on the table. "And I need to show you something." He opened the first drive and projected a video onto the wall. Grainy, shaky, lab footage. A timestamp in the corner, January 12, 2005. In the video, a woman stood in a sterile white lab, her face partially obscured by a surgical mask and goggles. "That's Dr. Avelina Knox," Ramsey confirmed. "Watch." The woman leaned over a clear incubation pod. Inside were 2 swaddled infants. Machines blinked around them, vitals displayed. One baby stirred, while the other kicked lightly. She spoke into a recorder. "Subjects 12B, designated Alina and Mira. 10 days old. Cognitive scans exceed projected thresholds. Eye tracking and sensory reactions developing 3 times faster than standard infants. But emotional response is what shocks me. They react to each other's pain. When one cries, the other quiets. When one sleeps, the other watches. I've never seen this in paired infants before. I should be proud, but all I feel is guilt. If they knew what the others planned, they'd run. I can't let them take my girls." Julian's breath caught. "She was protecting them," Mira whispered. "She wasn't a monster. She was our mother." Alina's voice cracked. "And she gave us up to save us." Ramsey paused the video. "We found no records of her after this. She went dark. No money trails, no communication logs. Either she was silenced, or she vanished on purpose." Julian stepped forward. "What else?" Ramsey opened the second drive. Blueprints filled the screen. Genetic charts. Neural diagrams. Then, a series of red files. Project ETA Child. Novigen's goal wasn't to enhance children, Ramsey said. It was to build programmable humans, genetically designed for warfare, espionage, mental resistance. Think, emotionless soldiers, perfect operatives. "But we're not like that," Alina argued. "We feel. We laugh. We cry. We're not weapons." "Exactly," Ramsey said. "You were different, and that's why Knox hid you. You weren't following the program. You were human." Julian clenched his fists. "So now they want them back. To dissect. To reprogram." Ramsey nodded grimly. "Or worse, to erase." The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Julian activated every private contact he had. Security systems doubled. Escape routes mapped. But he also worked on something else, empowering the twins. He had Alina and Mira tested by an old contact from the Biomedical Defense Agency, someone who owed Julian a lifetime of favors. The results were extraordinary. Cognitive reflexes, pattern recognition, memory retention, empathy indexing, all off the charts. But most fascinating was something neither of them had noticed before. When placed in separate rooms, their heart rates sensed. When one was exposed to like pain stimulus, the other showed mirrored neurological activity. Even when miles apart, they were connected. Not telepathically, not magically, but through something deep in their DNA. A resonance, a bond no one could replicate or predict. They're the only ones of their kind, the scientist told Julian. The only ones who remained human. Meanwhile, back in the shadows of the city, the Ascension Group made its next move. The rooftop woman, identified only by codename Eris, received her orders via satellite pulse. Extraction authorized. Targets must be retrieved alive. No civilian casualties. No trace left. Eris closed her tablet and looked out over the skyline. "Sorry, girls," she whispered. "You can't run from what you were born to be." That night, Julian made a choice he had avoided for 20 years. He opened the vault beneath his penthouse, the one sealed since his early days in the intelligence world. Inside were relics, encrypted dossiers, counter-surveillance tools, and 2 passports labeled Alina and Mira Wexley. Contingency protocol. He had hoped they'd never be used. He had prayed the past would stay buried. But now, his daughters' lives depended on it. As dawn broke over the city, Mira sat on the balcony, drawing the skyline. But her hands trembled slightly. Alina brought out a blanket and wrapped it around her. "Do you think she's still out there?" Mira asked. "Our birth mother." Alina stared into the rising sun. "If she is, she's been running for 20 years. From them. For us." Mira closed her sketchpad. "Then maybe it's our turn to stop running." Inside, Julian made one last call, to a woman known only as Seraph. She answered on the first ring. "I need an extraction plan," he said. 3 targets. Immediate. Her voice was smooth. Dangerous. "You found them, didn't you?" "I did. And now someone else has too." Seraph replied simply. "Then we burn the past and build a new future." Varied truths and fire escapes. The city skyline burned gold under the setting sun, but inside Julian Wexley's penthouse, the temperature had dropped. Not physically, but spiritually. Every light had been dimmed. Every security camera was turned to loop. The windows, usually wide open to the world, were now sealed and shaded. Julian stood at the kitchen counter, double-checking a tactical duffel bag. Inside, 3 burner phones, encrypted USBs, a revolver he hadn't touched in over 15 years, and 2 small vials of epinephrine. The world they were about to enter didn't allow for hesitation or missteps. Across the room, Alina was pacing like a storm in motion. Mira sat quietly, staring at the encrypted drive that had exposed their origins. Her art tablet lay abandoned on the floor. "How long do we have before they strike?" Alina asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes darted to every corner of the room like a wolf scanning for traps. Julian sipped the bag. "If they follow Ascension protocol, they won't come through the front door." Mira blinked. "Then where?" Julian walked to the far end of the room and pressed a fingerprint lock hidden behind a bookshelf. With a hiss, a panel slid open, revealing a dark shaft that descended into the private loading dock beneath the tower. "They'll come through the fire escape, and if they're smart, through the vents." Minutes later, the twins were dressed in black utility gear from Julian's old cage, form-fitting but flexible. Mira tied her curls back and stuffed her sketchbook into a waterproof satchel. "In case we don't make it," she whispered. Alina looked at her. "You're drawing in the middle of a manhunt." "I'm documenting this," Mira said. "Even if no one ever sees it, we have to leave behind the truth." Julian activated a sequence on his watch. All the security feeds lit up on the mirrored TV wall, the front door, the elevator, the roof hatch, and the alley. "Here they come," he said quietly. 3 men in gray suits moved like shadows, no weapons visible, but their eyes scanned with precision. One held a slim black case. "Extraction team," Julian confirmed. "Non-lethal specialists. For now." Mira backed away from the screen. "They look like ghosts." "They are," Julian said. "They were trained to erase evidence, not leave it." Within minutes, the penthouse was surrounded. Then, snap. The building's power cut off. Not just dimmed, killed. Julian cursed under his breath. "They're breaching the core." He turned to the twins. "No time. Move." They bolted toward the shaft and dropped into the darkness one by one. Julian laughed. As the panel sealed behind him, the floor above them rattled. 37 floors down. They emerged into a private parking level under the tower. One single black SUV waited in the shadows, engine off, windows tinted. A woman stood beside it. She was tall, her dark braid streaked with silver. Her long coat barely moved even as air swirled around her. Julian approached her with both relief and tension. "Seraph." "Julian." Her voice was calm and cold. "You're late." They moved faster than we expected. She glanced at the twins. "So these are the girls." Alina stepped forward. "You talk like we're a rumor." Seraph smirked. "Until now, you were." They drove through underground tunnels, passing beneath corporate buildings and abandoned subway lines, roads that weren't on any public map. Mira stared out the window, eyes wide. "This looks like something from a dystopian movie." Seraph glanced in the rearview mirror. "It is." Julian explained. "These tunnels were built for high-level asset extraction during the cold protocols. We're using them to reach a decommissioned lab, one of Novigen's oldest sites." Mira leaned closer. "Wait, Novigen? Why go back to them?" "Because," Seraph said, "the answers aren't in the future. They're buried in the past." They arrived at a rusted steel facility, camouflaged beneath an abandoned shipping yard. Moss covered the signage. NG7, Research and Containment. Inside, the building still smelled of chemicals and decay. Lights flickered on as Seraph restored emergency power. Julian pulled the twins into what looked like an old operating room. "This is where the trials began. Not the ones you were in, but the failures. The miscalculations. The others." Alina's eyes scanned the broken cots and blood-stained walls. "What happened here?" Seraph handed her an old folder. Inside were photos of malformed infants, incomplete DNA charts, and project logs ending abruptly. The final page simply read, "All subjects terminated, except 12V." Mira's knees buckled slightly. "All of them. Dead." Julian nodded solemnly. "They didn't survive the genetic splicing. You did." Alina's voice was low. "Why us?" "That's the question they want answered," Seraph said. "And why they're hunting you. You weren't just the success. You were the miracle." In the main lab, Seraph opened a steel vault that hadn't been touched in nearly 2 decades. Inside were storage disks, sealed canisters, and a handheld device shaped like a heart monitor. She held it up. "This was Avelina Knox's final prototype. It contains biometric data, your original genomes, pre-alteration." Mira frowned. She wanted to undo it. "No," Seraph said. "She wanted to prove you were still human, that your hearts beat for more than commands." Julian looked between the 2 young women, his daughters, and felt something shift deep inside. For so long, he thought the world would break them if it learned the truth. But now he realized. They were built to survive it. Back in the SUV, Julian made another decision, one he hadn't planned. "We're not running anymore," he said. "We're going public." Alina turned sharply. "You want to tell the world?" "Yes, I've spent my whole life hiding them. But this time, the truth is our shield, not our shame." Seraph warned, That will bring every ghost crawling out of the shadows. Julian nodded. Let them come. This time, I'm not alone. He looked at Alina, then at Mira, and both of them smiled. But far away, inside a dark chamber with glowing glass walls, a tall man in a gray suit stepped forward and placed a hand on a stasis pod. Inside, a body suspended in pale blue fluid, her face serene. Familiar. Evelina Knox. Still alive. Still sleeping. And the man whispered, "Wake up, doctor. Your daughters are ready." The woman in the stasis chamber. The silence in the underground facility was thicker than the dust that clung to the corners of its forgotten walls. The kind of silence that made your breath sound too loud. That made your heart feel like a drum. Julian, Mira, and Alina stood around the glowing chamber, staring at the woman suspended inside. Her long silver hair floated around her face like smoke in water. Her eyes were closed, her skin untouched by time. She looked more like a statue carved from peace than someone who had once defied a government program. Julian's throat tightened. That's her. That's Evelina Knox. Alina couldn't speak. Mira reached out a trembling hand toward the thick glass, placing her palm against it. The woman's face was a mirror, aging backward into their own features. The resemblance was unmistakable. "She's our mother," Mira breathed. "She's alive," Alina added, voice low and stunned. Seraph stepped forward and handed Julian a small keycard. "We didn't want to wake her until we were sure the girls were ready. Until she was ready. Her vitals have been stable for years. Brain activity. Minimal, but not dead. Just waiting." Julian hesitated. "And if she wakes up and regrets it?" Seraph met his gaze. "Then the world might not be ready for what comes next." 10 minutes later, they were in the biocontrol room. Alina and Mira sat behind the security glass, watching their mother's body slowly lower from the stasis tank, fluid draining as gentle lights warmed her form. Julian stood beside the terminal, fingers hovering over the activation button. "Are we sure this is the right move?" he asked. Mira looked at him. "She saved us. She gave us life. We deserve to know why." Julian looked at Alina. Her eyes were determined. "We need to hear the truth from her." Julian took a breath, then pressed the button. The chamber let out a long mechanical sigh. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Evelina's fingers twitched, her lips parted, and her chest rose. She gasped like someone returning from the bottom of the ocean. Eyes flew open, ice gray and startling. She looked around, disoriented. Then her gaze settled on the girls behind the glass. And she whispered, "Alina, Mira." Inside the recovery chamber, Evelina sat upright with the help of medical assistants. Her body was weak, but her mind sharp as ever. The moment her vision cleared, she asked the year. 2025. Seraph answered. "You've been asleep for 2 decades. Evelina's brows furrowed. "They're still alive." Julian stepped into view. "Yes, because of you." She blinked slowly. "And you are?" "Julian Wexley. I found them the night you left them behind. I raised them as my daughters." Evelina's lips quivered between pain and gratitude. "Then, you are the reason I can see them now." Mira and Alina stood just behind the glass. Evelina looked at them again, tears sliding down her pale cheeks. "I never stopped seeing you," she whispered. "Not once." An hour later, they gathered in the lower conference bay of the facility. It had once been used to brief scientists. Now, it held something far more fragile, a broken family trying to find its shape. Evelina, wrapped in a blanket, sat across from Alina and Mira. She studied them, not like a scientist analyzing data, but like a mother afraid to believe they were real. "I thought you'd hate me," she finally said. Alina leaned forward. "Why did you leave us?" Mira added, "Why put us in a trash bag? Why not give us to someone?" Evelina lowered her eyes. Because if I handed you to anyone, they would trace you. They would have come for you. Novigen had eyes everywhere. I chose a place no one would look, a place so awful, it would seem impossible for miracles to survive there. You abandoned us, Alina said softly, and we survived. Barely. Evelina looked up, but I watched. For weeks after, I hid across the street in a condemned building. I saw him. Julian, I saw how he wrapped you in his coat, how he never hesitated. I knew then you'd been saved. I could vanish in peace. Julian swallowed the lump in his throat. Mira's voice cracked. You really did love us, didn't you? I still do, Evelina said, even if I didn't deserve to. As the reunion softened, Seraph entered with a file. We have a problem. Everyone's eyes turned. She placed the folder on the table. Ascension agents breached the city perimeter. They're deploying a drone to scan for genetic signals. They'll find us within 12 hours, maybe less. Evelina looked at her daughters. Then it's time they learned the full truth about who they are. Julian hesitated, more than what we already know. Evelina turned to Mira and Alina. You two weren't just experiments. You were my apology. I worked on the Theta Child project for 5 years before I realized what it truly was, an attempt to erase humanity and rebuild it in the image of obedience. I helped design the genome that could create emotionless, efficient machines, people with no choice but to serve. Alina whispered, So you helped them make monsters? Evelina nodded, ashamed, until I saw the results. The failed babies, the vacant stares, the silence. They weren't alive. They were programmed. Mira's hands trembled. And us. You were the first I tried to fix, Evelina said. I reversed the emotional suppressants, increased empathy receptors, and rewired your pain pathways to connect to each other, not isolate. You weren't supposed to become weapons. You were supposed to become a proof of hope. Alina leaned back in her chair, stunned. Mira couldn't stop crying. You gave us humanity, Alina whispered. I gave you danger, Evelina replied. And now that they know you're alive, they'll never stop. That night, as the group prepared to relocate, Mira slipped into the old lab and found a locked drawer. Inside, a small velvet box. She opened it and gasped. 2 silver bracelets, marked with a strange engraving. /2B. Her and Alina. Evelina walked in and smiled softly. I made those before I let you go. Symbols of the bond between you. I wanted to leave something beautiful behind, in case you ever wondered if you were loved. Mira placed one on her wrist and took the other to Alina. The moment they both wore the bracelets, something strange happened. A faint pulse. From one to the other. And a voice echoed faintly in their heads, not words, but a feeling. Complete. Julian sat alone later, watching footage of the night he found them. The alley, the storm, his own terrified face reflected in the rain. And he realized something he had never understood until now. He hadn't saved them. They had saved him. They gave his life meaning, purpose, love, something no empire could give. And now, he would give everything to protect them. But as dawn broke, Ascension made their move. Dozens of drones darkened the sky over Sector 12. Their scanners locked onto the facility. Inside the command room, red lights flashed. Seraph looked at Evelina, Julian, and the twins. We move. Now. But on the security feed, something appeared that stopped Julian cold. A new figure. Tall, bald, cold eyes, and unmistakable. Director Harrow, the man who once led the Theta Child project, the man who ordered Evelina's termination. He stepped in front of a camera drone and said clearly, Alina, Mira, come home, or your father dies. The screen went black. The threat and the awakening. The screen went black, And for a long, terrifying second, no one in the underground lab moved. The echo of Director Harrow's voice still hung in the air like smoke. "Alina, Mira, come home, or your father dies." Julian didn't flinch, but Mira gasped as if the air had been sucked from the room. Alina was already moving, marching toward the comms terminal. Seraph caught her arm. "Wait." "No," Alina snapped. "He said father. That means they found our biological." "He didn't mean him," Mira interrupted. Her voice trembled. "He meant Julian." Julian slowly stood. "They're bluffing." But no one in the room believed that. Not after what they'd seen Ascension do to silence truths. Not after how far they'd come just to retrieve two young women whose very existence could collapse their entire operation. Avelina stepped forward, her face pale, voice tight. "Harrow never bluffs. He always hits where it hurts the most. And he knows. Julian is the only man you trust." 10 minutes later, the underground command room was in full lockdown. Seraph's agents armed every corner. The old tunnels leading out of the lab were sealed. Reinforcement signals were sent to loyal outposts across the city. Still, tension crackled like exposed wires. Mira sat on a crate in the corner, head buried in her arms. Alina stood beside her, pacing like a lioness. Julian stood apart from them, speaking quietly with Seraph. "He's after me," Julian said. "Not the girls. Not directly." "No," Seraph disagreed. "He's after their loyalty. He wants to break it. Make them doubt you, doubt their upbringing. He thinks if they question your love, they'll follow his leash instead." Julian's jaw clenched. "Then we make sure they never doubt it." Avelina gathered the twins in a quiet chamber off the corridor, away from the noise. She had something to give them, something she never thought she'd be alive to share. She pulled out a sealed black case. It hissed softly as it opened. Inside were two slender, polished rods. Each one had glowing symbols etched along the sides. Neither machine nor metal. Something ancient in design but futuristic in form. "What is this?" Alina asked. "These were meant to awaken your gifts," Avelina said. "Not powers, not magic. Your connection. What I built in your DNA was not a weapon. It was a key." "To what?" Mira whispered. "To each other." She held the rods out to them. "You were born with a shared network, an invisible link through a quantum biothread I embedded when you were embryos. But it's never been activated, because I wanted you to grow up as humans first, not projects." Mira and Alina each took a rod. It warmed in their palms. "Now," Avelina said, "when you use these together, you'll feel what the other feels. Think what the other thinks. Not always, not forever, but long enough to make the next move. Together." Meanwhile, in the heart of Ascension's base, Director Harrow stood in a stark, chrome command center. Behind him, dozens of monitors tracked the city. Drones hovered over Sector 12, and agents in unmarked vans waited for his command. A technician approached. "Sir, the twins have not responded." "They will," Harrow said coldly. "They care too much. That's their weakness." He pressed a button on his comlink and stared straight into the camera. "Julian Wexley, we know you're listening. You think you saved them, raised them. You were just the decoy, the shield. We let you have them. Now, we're taking them back." He paused. "You have 12 hours, or we deliver pieces of you to their doorstep." Julian turned off the feed, his hands shaking. Not in fear, in fury. "I won't hide," he said. "I'm going to him." Mira stood suddenly. "No, that's what he wants." "He'll kill others until he gets me," Julian insisted. "He's made that clear." Alina stood next to her sister. "Then we'll go with you." Julian's eyes widened. "No, I'm not dragging you into this." "You didn't drag us into anything," Alina said. "We were born into this, but we're not victims. We're not lab rats. And we're not kids anymore." Mira took a breath. You spent 20 years protecting us. Let us protect you now." As night fell, Seraph helped prepare a decoy convoy, 3 black vans, identical and headed in different directions. Meanwhile, Mira and Alina donned adaptive body armor, infused with signal jammers and biometric blockers. Julian was placed in the center vehicle, wired to a GPS burst rig. If he was removed or the car stopped in transit, Seraph's team would know instantly. They headed toward the extraction point Harrow designated. But the twins weren't in the vans. They were already moving, on foot, through the tunnels beneath Ascension's old facility. Their destination: the tower. The very place Julian found them 2 decades ago. Where it all began. The tower loomed like a sleeping beast, lights flickering faintly against the fog. The alley behind it hadn't changed. Still narrow, still cracked, still forgotten. But now it held ghosts. Mira stopped near the dumpster and stared. "Right here. This is where he found us." Alina stepped beside her. "And where Harrow expects us to return." They placed their rods together. The symbols began to pulse. And in that moment, the twins felt everything. Alina felt Mira's fear. Mira felt Alina's courage. They shared memories. Their childhood laughter. Their silent crying in Julian's arms when they had nightmares. Their whispered promises on stormy nights. "We'll never leave each other, ever." And in that moment, their shared bond bloomed like wildfire. Inside Ascension's tower, alarms blared. Unauthorized energy spike detected in Sector 2. Harrow turned toward the technician. "Who?" 12B, both of them. "They've activated the link." Harrow narrowed his eyes. "Deploy the reclaimers." Full engagement. Outside, the twins moved as one. Reclaimers, genetically modified agents, descended from rooftops in silent formations. 6. No. 8. The twins didn't run. Mira tapped her wrist. Her bracelet lit up. Now. In an instant, the twins launched an EMP surge from the rods. It didn't knock the reclaimers out, but it did collapse their visual targeting system. In the confusion, Alina struck low, sweeping the legs from one agent, while Mira vaulted over another with a steel rod. They didn't need training. Their instincts were synchronized. For every move Alina made, Mira anticipated it. For every dodge Mira took, Alina covered her. They weren't fighting as 2 people. They were moving as one mind. Inside the tower, Harrow watched the feed glitch and shatter. "They're beyond prototype," he said coldly. "Activate last protocol." The technician hesitated. "Sir, that will kill the hostages." "I don't care." Suddenly, the screen went dark. Then another face appeared. "Seraph." "Hello, Harrow. I believe you know me. You took my sister in Project Aether. I never forgot." Then another face appeared. "Evelina Knox. And now we're all here. And it's your turn to run." Behind Harrow, explosions ripped through the tower. Not from outside, but from within. Julian, disguised in one of the agent's stolen uniforms, emerged behind Harrow with a flash drive in hand. "Your reign is over," Julian said. "You should have stayed in the shadows." Mira and Alina burst into the control chamber just as Harrow turned, eyes wide. The last thing he saw was the reflection of 2 daughters who had once been discarded, now standing tall, whole, human, powerful. And he whispered, almost in awe, "You weren't supposed to survive." Then, silence. Later that night, the fire crews and authorities swarmed the scene, but the press couldn't explain what had happened. Explosions, electrical surges, a rogue tech cult. The truth was buried, but not forgotten. Back at the penthouse, Julian sat between Mira and Alina, hands clasped in theirs. Across from them sat Evelina, now free, no longer hiding, finally smiling. "I spent my life thinking you would hate me," she whispered. Mira squeezed her hand. "We don't hate you." Alina nodded. "You gave us life, but Julian gave us love. Together, you made us whole." Julian smiled. I didn't raise you to hide from the world. I raised you to change it. And now, they would. Not as experiments, not as victims, but as family. And as the sun rose over the city, the twins stood on the balcony of the very building where they were once thrown away, now ready to become everything they were meant to be. The legacy rewritten. Morning broke over the city like a quiet promise. Sunlight poured in through the wide glass windows of Julian Wexley's penthouse, clean, warm, and golden. For the first time in decades, the air inside didn't feel like an empty echo of wealth. It felt like home. Alina sat on the balcony railing, legs swinging softly, watching the sunrise in silence. Mira stood beside her, sketchbook in hand, drawing the skyline they had once viewed only through childhood dreams. Below them, the alley where their story began had been cleaned, repaved, and quietly transformed into a garden space. Julian joined them, holding 3 mugs of coffee. I never thought I'd live to see peace feel real, he said, handing the cups to each of them. Mira smiled. Feels weird, right? Julian nodded. Weird, but good. They sipped in silence for a moment. Then Alina turned to him. What happens now? He looked at her, then at Mira, and placed his cup down. Now we tell the world. That same morning, a press conference was called at the newly restored Wexley Foundation building, a massive marble and glass tower Julian had once used only for philanthropy and tax breaks. But now, it was something else. Julian stood on the stage in front of hundreds of cameras, with Mira and Alina beside him, and Adelina Knox seated quietly in the front row. I have kept a secret for 20 years, Julian began, and I'm no longer willing to let fear silence what needs to be said. He paused, taking a breath. The crowd leaned in. 20 years ago, I found 2 abandoned baby girls in a trash bag in the alley behind my home. I didn't know their names. I didn't know their story. I didn't know why anyone would do such a thing. But I knew this. They deserved a chance. Behind him, a screen lit up with photos. Alina and Mira as toddlers, learning to walk, blowing out candles, dressed for their high school graduation. The room gasped. Some reporters had heard the rumors, but none knew the truth. Julian continued, his voice steady. These 2 girls changed my life. They taught me what love really means, and though I didn't give them life, they gave me one. Alina stepped forward. We've learned in the past few weeks that we weren't just abandoned. We were hidden, protected, because we were part of something dangerous, something illegal, something dark. Mira followed. We're not ashamed of where we came from. We're proud, because we survived it, because we were loved anyway, and because now we're going to make sure no child is ever treated like a science experiment again. The applause was thunderous. Some stood, some cried, all listened. In the days that followed, a wave of international attention surged. Headlines exploded. Tigolias found in trash. Now LEDG Global Rights Movement. WEXLEY Foundation FUND's research on ETHICs in genetic science. Experiment in no longer. THEYR UVOICs. Pathor Millions. Julian donated half his fortune to a new initiative, the 12B Project, named after the only successful trial of the Novigen program. But instead of secrecy, it was built on transparency, justice, human dignity. Adelina Knox, once branded a traitor, was cleared of all charges and reinstated as a researcher. Under new ethics codes she helped write. She refused any salary. This is penance, she told the media, not profit. But as peace began to settle, one final mystery still lingered, one that only Adelina could answer. Late one night, Mira found her in the lab archive room, staring at an old sealed file labeled Project Omega. What is it? Mira asked. Adelina didn't look up. The first file I ever created. Before you. Before Project Theta. Before the Reclaimers. Mira stepped closer. What's in it? Avelina opened the folder. Inside was a photograph. A baby boy. His eyes glowing faintly blue. His name was Cashin. The first test subject born with an integrated neural link. But it was too unstable. He didn't survive. Or so they told me. Mira stared at the photo. You think he's still out there? Avelina nodded slowly. I think Project Omega never shut down. I think Hera wasn't the top. I think someone else is still watching. 1 week later, Alina received a coded message on her secure terminal. It contained only 3 words. Siblings, not 2. Below it, a location pin. Buried in the Arctic Circle. Alina showed it to Mira. Together, they'd brought it to Julian. He stared at the coordinates, then at them. You don't have to go, he said. You've done enough. You are enough. But the girls looked at each other. Then Mira said, we need to know. Not just for us. For all of us. Julian nodded slowly. Then we go together. 3 figures in white coats stepped off a private aircraft into the freezing wind. The ice cracked beneath their boots as they crossed toward a camouflaged entrance buried beneath snow and silence. This wasn't an ending. This was the next chapter. But they weren't afraid. Because they were no longer abandoned. They were armed with truth. And they would never be alone again.